I love this room. There's candles on the wall. There's a line of chairs. There's this like hexagon shaped, almost sci-fi looking half object attached to the wall with a disc on the front, wood on the ceiling, and these incredibly cool green tinted windows behind us. And I'm sitting across from Laura Cassidy. What is this place?
This is called the Gathering Space. It's how we at Recompose have reimagined a space for ceremony for a person whose life has ended. Yeah, it's kind of a non-denominational, open, sort of a non-religious kind of a space for gathering. And our team has sort of built or designed a ceremony to go along with what is a new form of death care that we've brought into the world.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about Recompose and what it is?
Yeah. Our founder is Katrina Spade, and the story of everything that's happening today goes back to 2011. Katrina was in architecture school and in her own life had this cause to realize that many people in the world have to choose between burial and cremation. And she just, kind of was very struck by what poor choices those are. And as somebody who was always taught to think about her path on the planet, it just seemed absurd to her that you'd have to make a pretty bad decision at the end of your life. And how come we can't keep our nutrients going? How come we can't actually return to the earth and do these things that are sort of in the culture and in different ways? But why don't we really do that in a actual way with our nutrients and with all that is good about our bodies? She began to look for an environmental solution for end-of-life care, and she brought that into her architecture studies, and it just kind of became her whole life. And she created the kind of legal pathway to offering this care here in Washington, and has been really important in other states creating the law. And now it sort of has a life of its own, and there are people everywhere around the planet kind of trying to offer this care in their communities.
Thanks for sharing that story. I'm interested in like bringing us down to like the real basics. Mm-hmm. You tell the people what's different about this kind of care that you're offering. Yeah,
I kind of gave you the big overarching how we got here, but what it actually is human composting. So it's common out on the forest floor or under a tree when the leaves fall in the autumn. You can't stop decomposition from happening. And something that was once alive is now dead, and it's going to feed its nutrients into whatever is surrounding it. And agriculturally in farms and otherwise, there's a practice of composting animals, but it hadn't yet become something that was available to humans until Katrina kind of went on that journey. And so we care for folks really mimicking what happens in the natural world and creating a environment for their body to break down and for their nutrients to be saved and to transition a body into compost. It can be spread under a tree or nourishing a rose garden or whatever feels right.
So there's like so much that I want to talk to you about, and we're going to have a conversation built around these three basic kind of pillars of experience, which are people, bodies, and money. But I want to start with you. Okay. I'm curious to learn more about who you are and what you do here.
Yeah, I come from a journalism background originally, and was pretty happy to write about fashion and design and culture and art and music and these different things. And happy to do that until I kind of wasn't. And I just sort of hit a wall where it wasn't, something felt like it just wasn't fitting anymore. One thing kind of led to another, and some friends of mine said, well, you should facilitate grief work for other people. And I kind of said I should. And I am the type of person that is often telling other people, hey, you should, and it doesn't always come back to me. So it was it was just a moment that I really paid attention to, that these two really smart women in my life were like, you should offer grief work to other people. I was like, wow, I have to pay attention to that because this is an uncommon moment for me. And I looked into it and played around with the idea and just kind of kept following it until I felt like I actually could offer grief work with people. And in all of this was the pandemic and the kind of way that many lives changed and felt different and hour by hour. And so kind of offering all of this and exploring this new part of how I was showing up in the world was happening during all of that. And what I found in doing grief work with people was that it was what I wanted to do more of. Whenever I stopped and looked at my life, well, this is fine, this is okay. I wish I was doing more of this. And long story short on that, I spent a year working in this traditional funeral home, still doing some grief work on the side, still doing some other things on the side, but going to a handful of funerals every day and helping the funeral director and helping the family. And most people that had ever had my job there in the past were like 22-year-old, something or other, and they weren't maybe always present all the time. And as soon as the funeral directors realized, oh, this is an actual adult and we could probably just take an extra hour at lunch or go home early and Laura's there and we'll be fine. So I really ended up having a lot of responsibility, doing a lot, seeing a lot, and having that same feeling of like, this is what I would like to do more of. I knew about Recompose. I knew what was happening here. I knew Katrina from friends, and it was a small city. I kind of had some friends in common. And at a certain point, I just called her up and sort of said, been doing funeral work for a while now. I'm really interested in doing some more. And it turns out she needed somebody to do outreach work. So things all came together. And I was just really happy to find that I had found a new place for myself, I guess. It felt important to have understood something that I wanted and been able to get it. I guess maybe I want to say especially at 50 years old and within a field that can feel hard to understand or to get into. A lot of people nowadays ask me about getting into death care, and people tend to think, well, you could be a funeral director, or is that it? There's not a lot of sight into what other kinds of opportunities or ways that you could be involved in death care. So I don't know, at this point, most days I go home feeling pretty happy that I was able to find a way to be helpful to people. That's always been really important to me. And to talk with folks about really important things. I'm a connector. I like to get to the heart of things, and that I can help be a part of this organization that I believe so much in. There's like this bigger thing that we're all doing to create a real movement and to make a very big and impactful change environmentally within at least our industry, but at the same time to intersect with each given life and each given family and community, and to make hopefully a positive change there as well. So, and then through all of that, I feel really fortunate to have the opportunity to really always be reflecting on my own life and the lives of people that I love and what all of that means. It's just nice to be able to dwell in that world.
I'm interested in learning, as you've been in this space for a few years, having come from journalism and fashion and art. You're in such cool spaces, right? Going to Fashion Week. This feels so radically different from what I imagined that being like. You described being involved in a world that was fun until it wasn't. Mm-hmm. I think you said fun until it wasn't, or interesting until it wasn't.
Yeah, probably. Either one.
Do you anticipate, being in this world and encountering those things as you go along? Like, are there things about it that have become less interesting over time to you?
Not yet. Yeah. I think people talk about burnout a lot in this field, and there are ways in which you have to kind of recalibrate your own life so that when you're not at work, you're proverbially filling your battery back up. I think I spend time with different people. I'm choosier about how I spend my free time because I do listen and attune to others all day. And I do find that I need to not always do that on the weekend or whatever. So there are ways that I'm probably protecting my future in this world by thinking about what I need to stay present in it. I don't imagine that it will become less interesting to me, but I couldn't rule that out, just knowing myself as I do. I can't help but sort of look over my shoulder, so to speak, and see the way that things did come together for this to happen. As a kid, I was hugely preoccupied with the fact that I had never been to a funeral and that, Mom, nobody I know has died yet. Like, when is that going to happen? And maybe that's common for a kid to feel that, but I remember really being really interested that that hadn't happened for me. I was also really chronically sick as a kid, spent a lot of time in Children's Hospital. In those days, they put sick kids 4 to a room, and I would just watch what was usually a room of young cancer patients being treated in one way or another, and really thinking about what life is and why some people suffer and others don't, and all of that stuff at 12, And so I can see the ways in which I was curious, not in death per se, but in maybe just the finite nature of our lives and how we recognize that in ourselves was always kind of there. And I also remember when my dad was becoming very sick and dying, and I said out loud to somebody, I'm not going to give birth to anybody. So I think it's good for me to give death to my dad. And I really saw that as an opportunity to be there for him as much as I could. And it didn't work out that well in practice. We had a rough time, he and I, trying to get through his death, and that probably just got me in deeper to it, to then try to right that. Not wrong, but to do better there. And yeah, there's kind of a lot I could say about how I see this even sort of cultural moment. And you heard me earlier talking to some folks that were here at Recompose tonight about how more folks do seem to be tuning into end of life matters. And I kind of have some interesting ideas about that. You want to hear them?
I do. And I'll just add like a small anecdote, which was the other day I was walking, normal day. I was heading home from Trader Joe's. The person who was in front of me had a shirt, and the back of it was a black shirt with white lettering and a quote that said, "Ask me about my death plan."
Oh, wow. Cool.
And I had taken a tour of Recompose before, and it had been on my mind. I have a button sitting next to my bathroom sink from this place that says, "Compost me when I die." Is that right?
Yeah.
So I was attuned to sort of paying attention to this, but I was struck by the idea that it would be on a t-shirt and that it was a kind of invitation into a conversation about what appears to be a kind of, if not taboo, a rather secret, don't talk about subject. And I am interested in your ideas, and I'd love to hear them. We should do that now.
Okay. Well, I want to address that. So within journalism and all of that, there were some times in my life when that table has turned and I've been more of the artist or designer or maker, and rather than the person talking about the artist or the designer or the maker. And one of the projects that I was asked to do was when Bumbershoot, a Seattle famous arts festival, had taken some years off during the pandemic and came back online, and they were doing sort of a fashion element within their arts exhibits at Bumbershoot, and I was asked to do something for that realm, and I was like, I'm not into fashion anymore, come on. And the artistic director was like, well, what are you into? And I said, death. And he said, well, put the two together. And that was a pretty good challenge. So I ended up doing this performance called Morning Clothes, which involved asking like 12 artist, designer, stylist types to imagine clothing that you would wear to tell the world, hey, I'm in mourning. And part of that was I made a silkscreen design that said, ask me about this hole in my heart, because for me, it is about being able to talk about it. And although for the most part, that piece was about having those 12 other people design and outfit their models for this kind of parade route that we took, I had to make something for myself as well to wear in this performance. And part of that was this silkscreen design that feels kind of akin to this person's t-shirt, where it's like actively putting that on the table, and that just feels kind of cool and punk to me, to just sort of like, ask me about this, So that's a step out of our conversation where I was going to tell you about some of the things that I see that might be part of a cultural shift to why more people are wanting to wear t-shirts that say, ask me about my death plan or something like that. Well, obviously, during the earlier years of COVID, we did all have to kind of get more attuned to the finality of our time on earth, and death and dying were all around us. And I think, truly, unfortunately, now we live in a state of multiple genocide, and death and dying are just in every direction that we look. This isn't, my sunniest conversation topic ever, but it feels to me that we need more people to attune and train and understand and get lots more comfortable with death, because it's possible that we're going to need a lot more people to be kind of on the ground helping with death and dying. Even if you just look at the fact that there's a whole boomer generation that's made up of a lot of people, and they're all entering their dying years. But potentially with the environment and other things on our burning planet, that we just may need more people to be able to work in this part of our lives.
I'm going to try to put a pin in some of what you've said and bring it back later. I'm going to start with asking you about people. And the simple question is, like, how are people involved in what you do here?
People are everything. Yeah. So we care for the person who has died, and we care for the person who care about that person. So one part of my job is education and outreach and sharing with people how this works. And I think that's certainly a way that people are involved in my work. But I also work with clients who fall into a category that we call eminent. So we realized at a certain point that people were getting in touch with us when the person themselves is dying, has this terminal diagnosis, and is saying, I want to choose that care for myself. How does it work? What do I need? I want to pay for it myself. I don't want anybody to have to deal with it after I'm gone. And then, so sometimes it might just be about that. And then sometimes it can be, I'm choosing this care and all my family thinks I'm crazy. Okay, well, bring your family in. I'll tell them what I know. We're going to show them all our spaces. I won't try to convince them, but I'll tell them everything I know. And if they feel better about it by the time we leave, then you'll feel better about it too. And so that is, I would say, my favorite way of working with people in this process, is just seeing how profoundly it impacts them and those in their lives, to know that this is what's going to happen to them. It doesn't take away all of the sadness and sorrow and all of the deep pain that's happening, but there is this really cool thing that they get to hold on to through all of that also. And it really makes a difference in their lives. I talk to people, every week that will say something to me like, yes, I'm planning on taking my Death with Dignity medication next month, or, my hospice doctor says X, Y, and Z amount of days, and that's really hard. But every day I'm looking out my window and watching the trees and just knowing that I'm going to be growing another tree, or whatever that kind of looks like and how they describe it. It's an immense gift to be able to be in a conversation like that.
Yeah, you've really I'm feeling that while you talk about it.
Yeah.
It's super profound. And earlier during your tour that we got to experience before this conversation, you mentioned wanting to be a part of building the world that you want to live in.
Yeah.
About how, as a business, you might be moving slower than some want you to. And there's this kind of daily practice of being in this world that you want to live in. And I thought, oh, wow, it really seems to me like you're building a world that you want to die in.
It's another way of looking at it, for sure. I really like the way you said that, because earlier I had said, regarding some of the different ways that Recompose is set up as a business and the way that we do things, we are doing death care differently. We are trying to create, the world that we want to live in, yes, but you're right. We're creating the kind of world that we feel better dying in as well, and kind of maybe my favorite thing about dying and being in spaces where somebody is at the end of their life is that it's really easy to pick out what matters and what doesn't, and this kind of speaks to like moving away from other things that I did with my life. It's like going through death with my dad and with my favorite aunt and uncle and things like that. It's when you're deep at somebody's bedside in those moments, you're not thinking about getting a new pair of Nikes or watering the grass or whether or not, these things that just don't matter. You're not thinking about them. And death, it shows you what life is really about.
I'm curious about moments of tension or frustration or confusion. I guess the question could be, what does it look like for you when part of that doesn't go the way you want it to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what comes to mind is that just there are a lot of people where their family relationship or their community relationship is already a little broken. And when someone dies, there's an extra amount of pain and discomfort. And maybe that family or community hasn't been good at supporting each other or communicating for a really long time. And now they're really not good at communicating and supporting each other. And it's really hard to mediate those circles. And you do your best and you hope that there are ways in which walking through death will show them some new stuff about life, and maybe they will have some big healing moments. But it might also just be really rough, and you might just witness what feels like unimportant bicker and people being, just not loving with each other or something. I think that's probably the worst that it gets, is just when there's already some discomfort in that family or that community, and that going through this together is going to be really hard for them because they have forgotten how to like each other. That's probably the worst part. There are certainly times when a death feels particularly sorrowful, or you can just feel the pain for different reasons, whether it's maybe how the person died or when in their lifetime they died. That can be really hard. And there's the fact that those of us that work in death care are also going to experience deaths in our life as we're working in this world. And it's been humbling, I guess, because I think that's happened 2 times now that I've lost somebody that I really love while working here. And I sometimes just have that feeling of like, maybe it's sort of an imposter syndrome or just fraud or something, like, oh my God, I can't do this. What do I mean that I have certain faculty with grief or death? Like I don't know anything right now. I've lost all the ground under my feet. And it's really actually great to eventually be brought back around. And yeah, there's no reason that I should handle this better. There's no reason that I have to not break down and cry.
Right, because you're the expert.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as we talk and as we've been in this space, I've noticed that my demeanor has is quite different than it is elsewhere. I'm talking lower. Earlier I was holding my hands behind my back while walking around, you know, really trying to feel this sense of, or project or whatever, a sense of respect, a sense of demure. Is this the word? You know, but this is a place that you go to all the time. And you must come here listening to a podcast or your favorite song. Maybe you're hyped up and you're having a good day. Do you find yourself in that performance of this kind of demure state? Like when you interact with people?
Well, I know what you mean about holding your hands behind your back. I started doing that when I worked at the traditional funeral home where I worked in 2022. I was like, all of a sudden realized one day, like, oh, you have these new postures. What is that? You know? And yeah, it's this interesting way of showing with your body, essentially, I'm not centering myself here. Like, this is for you. I'm over here if you need me, but I'm also not going to get in your way, you know, kind of a posture.
That does lead me to think about bodies and how you might hold your body here at work or display your intentions by changing your posture or your demeanor or your comportment. And I'm wondering if we could talk more specifically about bodies, not only how you might handle your own body here at work, but of course, we're talking about bodies, right? Like we're talking about composting bodies. And I'm wondering if you can just open up that part of the conversation around how you think about bodies in this work. It seems like the most obvious question to ask without much of an answer.
It's interesting too, because it's kind of not something that is within what is spoken about within the realm of death. Interestingly, bodies are not always part of that conversation. And probably the biggest exception to that is talking about or coming to realize that we aren't our bodies. That's common, maybe, when somebody dies, the idea of, well, I know that's not them, that's their body. Or there are people that might make sort of nervously flippant remarks about, well, that'll just be my body. It's not me. You know, maybe they're making prearrangements or something and they'll say, well, that's just going to be my body. It's not me. And there's different ways of saying that. But so I guess, yeah, there's the way that I might move and act and speak more quietly or move more slowly, just because I am trying to gauge and take my cues and clues from the others that I'm working with. I'm trying to see where they're at and trying to read what they're telling me with their body and their tone and their language and meet them where they're at. So there's that aspect of it. But it's certainly true that there is a conversation that you can get into in this world around these, you know, meat suits is a common term these days. You know, I heard it on the internet. You know, we have to have this flesh and bone to get through the world, but it seems like more and more people are becoming comfortable that this isn't who I am.
Wow. So what's interesting is almost like I'm thinking there might be a contradiction in some of this. In the attraction toward Recompose, and I'll just speak personally, but we've heard from others and you've taught me about how people experience this place. There's this feeling of like, okay, well, at least I will, let's say, reduce my impact on the environment by choosing this option, or I get to help grow a tree someday.
Right.
You know? Right. But there is this rift between me and the body that you're describing. Mm-hmm. And if I've explained that correctly, how do you think people deal with that, where that simultaneously you're like, oh, that's not going to be me, but you're kind of like, that is me and my final act, right?
Yeah. I mean, we have to do something with this traveling suit that we have. Something needs to happen to it. And there are rules and laws and regulations around what we can do with it. So if we have these certain choices, what feels the best what is the best way for me to lay my traveling suit aside so that I can go on with whatever cosmic adventure or not is happening next. And I think that is where you kind of get to those ideas of, I won't be using it anymore. How great if it can go grow some roses or nourish a new tree, and that feels good to me, to think of it that way. That literally something has to be done with this, and what is the least harmful and the most productive thing I can do.
Yep. I mean, I feel similarly in conversations about this service, that comments about the body, the physical body, like the bones, right? The fillings or the stent in the heart. Yeah. You start to get into the description of the physicality of what's going to happen. And I'm interested in your choice of language when you talk about placing the body in the vessel. I've heard you use the word you, like when we place you in the vessel. I think I heard you use the word when the body goes in the vessel, or when the person goes in the vessel. How do you choose those words, and what do those words say about how you're thinking about the body part of this?
We usually say when we're placing an individual into the vessel. Okay. So we're, after death, typically not referring to that as a person per se, although we do also use this idea of your person. Mm-hmm. Traditionally, conventionally, a funeral home will often use a word decedent, which feels really dry and not very, it's clinical, and it doesn't feel very good I don't really want anybody to talk about my mom as the decedent. Right. On the other side of that, traditionally, the funeral industry might use the term your loved one or the loved one. It's not always how it shakes out. You might be caring for somebody that you wouldn't always use the word loved for. Complications arise. Relationships are complex. So kind of moving away from language that didn't always feel right. And then, trying to create opportunities for other people's processes to evolve the way that works for them. So maybe most people would prefer for us to not continue saying Annie is in the vessel now. But by the same token, if I read the fact that a family wants to keep calling Annie Annie, and the soil there is still being referred to as Annie by that family, I'm going to follow suit. It's pretty nuanced. It's really about listening to see what feels better to that family or community, but then also following some kind of agreed upon language on our end. So of saying the individual is placed in the vessel. If that person is no longer there in certain ways of understanding it, maybe individual is a step away from the humanity that person once embodied to now speaking about the suit that they wore on Earth. I don't know, there's no 4 right answers that work in 4 situations. It's pretty fluid.
Yeah. I was struck by the practice here at Recompose to have what you call the cedar room, where, and maybe I'll try to describe it. Sure. The body can be experienced by people in grief or in mourning in ways that counter some of what I would expect to do in Washington in 2025, which is maybe wash the body, or at least hold hands with the individual. And the question is I don't encounter dead bodies. I don't really want to. I think it would be kind of strange to sit there with the body. I guess being in the presence of the body itself. I've only done that once, and it kind of was shocking. I mean, I've seen bodies on the street after moments of violence. I've been in moments where I'm like, wow, holy moly. there's a dead body over there. But to sit with one feels with intention, you know?
I think something that happens a lot is maybe one person in the family or community has decided that that's something that they want to do, and that there are 3 or 4 others that not sure how they'll be able to handle that, and if they really want to go in that room. They're coming because this other person arranged it. They haven't figured out how to say no. For whatever reason, they're here, but they're inside the building still expressing to us or to their other person, I don't know if I want to go in that room. And if I go in that room, I don't know how long I'm going to be able to stay there.
Yeah.
And I think what we see often is they'll stay there for the hour that they've allotted, you know, they'll stay there for an hour and then see if they can stay there longer, you know. I mean, of course it's intimidating. Of course there's no paradigm or embodied experience to draw from. It's like, what do you mean I got to go in that room and see the body of this person that I haven't even really yet believed is actually gone, you know? And I kind of think that's sort of what that room is for that truth to land in those people's bodies, that this is happening to all of us and it has just happened to this person, and a lifetime of memories is in all of your peripheral vision, and these next months or years on the calendar are going to be colored by all of this, and here we go, you know? I think that's kind of how that room ends up being used sometimes. It's like, let's get in the deep end for a little bit and see what we can do, you know?
Yep. And on that room, I've noticed in the tours that you clarify for people that the use of that space or the use of this space we're sitting in now, that it's an extra charge.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really interested in these moments when you have to talk to people about money.
Yeah.
And that leads us to our third section, if you will, about the money side of things here. How would you describe the involvement of money in what you do?
Well, one of the first things that comes to mind is that, you know, unfortunately, we're working pretty hard to right some of what the funeral industry has done wrong for a long time. And that involves really shady practices and hiding costs over here and, you know, slipping them in over there. And so first and foremost, we always want to be really transparent and honest and upfront about, here's a cool part of what we do, but just so you know, it will cost more money. You know, I mean, it just feels like the right thing to do, that everybody understands what that looks like. I'm aware that it could feel like, why is she talking about that? You know, but on the flip side of that, there are lots of folks that want to say $7,000, that, you know, my brother-in-law died and it only cost us $2,000 to cremate him. Why is it so expensive? For a lot of people, that's something that they really want to know is, what are the costs associated? And I feel like it's really important to be super straightforward and honest about all the aspects of this care. So trying to balance those, and then certainly dealing with or responding to the thought that some people have that it is on the costly end. And I'll say there are lots of people that go, wow, that's not as much as I thought it would be, or that sounds very fair. You know, when you think about it, we're caring for a person for 2 months to 2-3 months. And so if cremation is over in 4 hours and can cost around $3,000 on the low end, it should make some sense that for a process that takes longer, you know, that would have cost more. I certainly understand that very most practical aspect of all of this is what a lot of people need to figure out first. And, you know, do I have money to pay for this, or do I need to, you know, investigate how I could spend less money? And I have a lot of respect for that. And there's also a large part of me, am I going to say this? I'm going to say it. It's like half-price sushi. That's not really where I want to save money. Yeah. Like there are ways that I am interested in saving money, and there are ways where I'm happy to pay full price for a good experience. And I will hope to always have the privilege of choosing something like this, a program, a community of people, a team of folks, a building, an array of equipment and tools that are literally built with intention to last for a long time so as not to create landfill at the same time that we're saving carbon. The big picture of what is really good for the planet and operating in a way that you want to see replicated. I feel like I will try to always choose those experiences, but I also recognize that that's a privilege and that not everybody is going to be able to do that. And for that reason, I'm really glad that we have a community fund. So we do keep money in a community fund for folks that wouldn't otherwise have access to this care. And one way that that fund is fulfilled is by our investors. So we've not ever taken venture capital, but we do have a lot of private investments, people that are investing for the long run, people that are investing in environmental businesses, in female-owned businesses, in future forward businesses. And those people that invest often divert their dividends into the community fund so that more people have access to this care.
Very interesting. There's a trend in the world of economic sociology and thinking about morality and moments when our kind of sacred acts or processes or things, moments where those things encounter money and markets and investing. And the question is like, what happens when you have something that's kind of sacred, held sacred, being placed outside of everyday life, given special meaning and purpose and language and treatment? What happens when that thing encounters something so ordinary and, quote, rationalized as like money and finance? Does the money take away from the sacred qualities of, let's say, it's the process of grieving or the body or death itself? And I'm interested in this collision that you're living in all the time. If that feels real to you, and if it does, how do you navigate it?
Well, profit is not the reason that we exist. Money isn't the reason that Recompose is here, but we do need money to keep doing this work. We need to build more facilities like this, that where care has been put into the real wood that appears on the ceiling or on the floor, or we need money to hire the very best people so that we can give the very best care. But it's not the reason that we do what we do. So a lot of times people will ask, is Recompose a nonprofit? Or questions around how the business is set up. And interestingly, we are set up as a public benefit corporation, which is a small but pretty important distinction in the business licensing itself that says nobody on our board, nobody in our investment community can strong arm us into opening 7 new locations next year because we got to feed back those investments. The public benefit corporation distinction allows us to say, no, we're thinking about the health of our employees and the health of the planet and the sustainability of growing a brand new thing like this. So I think it's probably not anybody's favorite moment when maybe you need to say, hey, can you remember to pay your bill? Or we need you to log in your bank account number so we can sign up that, or seal up that end of the process. But I want to recognize how interesting that end of the conversation is. That wouldn't it be cool if we could have a trade economy and universal basic income and take care of each other in other ways? But for right now, the system that we have requires us to change money for goods and services, and I just feel super comfortable with the fees associated with the care and the experience that's offered here.
So I have 2 more questions for you. One of them is, what's something that you would really want to tell people or a person who's interested in getting involved in this kind of work?
Yeah, I think for me, I really can only speak from experience. And it was my experience that it was necessary for me to enter in the ground floor and take a job that for 10 months, I was not an art director. I was not a creative director. I wasn't in charge. And that was what I needed to do in order to find my place. So I think that's what I most often hear myself telling people is that you may need to take a look at what you've built in your own career and decide if you can go without some words in your title, and if you can kind of batten some hatches and look at your grocery order differently for a while, and because even without maybe needing to take a pay cut or whatever, the funeral industry, historically, generally speaking, is not a high-paying industry, So you may have to kind of figure how you're going to make it work for yourself. And a lot of people are doing death doula training these days, and we're not yet at a time in our collective history where everybody wants to hire a death doula. So beautiful. Take death doula training, understand how people die, be there for people in your family and community. If somebody wants to hire you and pay for that, awesome. But be really careful about quitting your day job, thinking that you're just gonna hang that sign outside your door and offer your services, because we're just not there yet, and maybe someday hiring that type of person to help in your home or in the hospice or whatever will be more common for folks. But this is still really early days in that. And so I guess summing all of that up, just know that it is probably going to require some rethinking of different parts of your life.
Yeah. What's the one thing you wish people, everyday people, knew about what you do here?
Gosh. I guess I want to say something about how, there are about 15 or 16 people that work here, and gosh, what do I want to say about that? Is there another way that you could ask it?
Yeah. I'll give you an example.
Okay.
When I was a tattoo artist, I had this desire, and I wrote it in the book that I wrote, for people to understand how hard it was to tattoo people for money. Because on the Instagram, on the surface, being a tattoo artist looks cool and fun. And when I figured out how incredibly difficult it was to do and to try and do it for money, and when I was around people doing that every day, watching how skilled they were, watching how difficult their job was, I had this deep desire to scream to the world, this isn't as easy and as cool and as fun as you think it is. It's worth every penny that you're paying.
Right.
And for all of you that think you want to do this thing, think again. Hence, a lot of my book is about that. And so I'm interested in these unspoken, maybe it's not the hardship or maybe it's the magic. What's the thing that you're thinking, there's a perception of this thing out there, but that perception might not be correct? Or maybe it's everything they think it is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it strikes me there's a certain kind of person, or, certainly some people, their reaction is oh, is that depressing kind of work? I'm a person that can have depression, certainly. And some people in my life have sort of said, well, gosh, you do work in death care. That have you looked at, maybe that's contributing? And I can just think of these conversations that I've had with a hospice nurse or something who probably has really similar things said to them. Wow, you work in hospice, that sounds terrible. But there are so many hospice nurses that are filled with joy. And they're this is the most amazing work you could ever have the privilege to do. And I think I might start with something like that people that work in death care, whether that's the beautiful, extremely hardworking funeral directors that carry so much responsibility on their shoulders, or it's the folks that work in the greenhouse that sort of don't get to have as much connection to the family and might never get to meet that person's mother, daughter, sister, brother, best friend, but they're so attentively caring to the process for months at a time and having their own connection to what this transformation is. You know, those people are cutting it up at lunch. They told a great joke, and they're filled with a lot of heavy feelings because this particular case is really hard. It reminds them of something, or, you know, so I think all of us are so much more dimensional than we might think at any given moment. And any job can have like maybe surprisingly beautiful elements and also really difficult stuff. But be careful not to think that working in death care is either this kind of glorified thing where you get to make a difference every day, or it's also not heavy, difficult stuff that you go home and just stare at a wall. You know, it's just so much more nuanced than that. You know, there's days where you your words didn't come out right and you hurt somebody's feelings, or you just put your foot in your mouth and you made your coworker feel dumb, or, you know, and there's days that you're just so in touch with what feels to you, at least, like what life is all about, and super aware of how much you want to let go of the bullshit and how much you want to lean into building better relationships with people in your life. So I would say that maybe that's one of the harder things for people to imagine, is just what it really feels like to come to work here every day. And I'll say everybody that works here will tell you this is what they want to be doing. This is the work worth investing in, and it's not always easy, and it's hard sometimes, especially because this is a brand new paradigm that we're constantly learning from. But if you want to work in death care, this is a really amazing place to do that. And it's all different colors and all different tones and all different shapes all the time. So,
well, Laura, you're amazing. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing your story and telling us about all that.
Yeah, thanks for being interested. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.